of music and all that they provide for their listeners. Our burden in this debate is to prove that the existence of these record labels results in artists being harmfully manipulated as well as being financially worsened. As for the model and the worlds which we prefer, firstly though, my substantives, I'll be telling you firstly about the harmful manipulation of artists. Secondly, the unjust financial distribution to artists, with Germany splitting for the inequality for minority musicians. So what we support in terms of our model, we have all artists, independent of any record labels in our world. Artists will still have support from agents and from managers and from teams which they themselves will employ. Also, artists will own all rights to their own music. That's what's really key, meaning that they receive and distribute the income which their music generates. Artists will still have platforms like social media to generate a following at first, but will then of course will have the capital and means to invest in like material advertising, looking like billboards and that sort of thing. A note on this motion though, we think that like the age of social media and the means that it provides artists to self-promote means that now is an ideal time to get rid of record labels, and that artists now have these means of like self-promoting their music and themselves. Firstly then, on the harmful manipulation of artists. We tell you that the incentives of record labels causes immeasurable harm to musicians and they're being profit driven and so on. 5 mechanisms for why this is the case. Firstly, is that artists are locked in and can't escape from labels, right? Labels are responsible literally for giving like these artists their platform, from like getting them onto the streaming services due to like the power which they hold within the music industry. In the same way, artists are going to lose their platform if they cut ties with that label. That means that they are locked in. This is what happens when you have labels and all the power which they have. Secondly, is a lack of accountability. Record labels, of course, hold a lot of control over like the music economy and over the media, so they're not accountable. Like in case there's like blatant underpaying or sexual abuse, the power which they hold means they can get away with a lot, which they otherwise wouldn't, and which these artists otherwise wouldn't be subject to. Thirdly, is that it forces artists, and like record labels force artists to pump out music, right? So like the artist is like will have signed a contract. The interest of that label is for them to pump out as much music as they can in order to generate as much income for that label. What the specifications of which have obviously been laid out in the contract, but the incentive remains with that record label for the artists to pump out as much music as possible. Artists get overworked and like the quality of their music worsens as this quantity is like emphasized by the labels. Artists burn out. You already like hear about these artists who literally quit music just for like getting sick of it. That's going to be even worse when they've got like a record label pushing them to release more and more music. Fourthly, is that record labels will dictate the artist's creativity, right? So music that doesn't like appeal to the majority won't be published or will like be changed by the labels. Again, labels want to maximize their income. That is like equated by like the number of people like listening to the music. If like the labels don't think it's good enough or don't think enough people are going to listen to it, then they won't like release it, or at least will like try to change it. Again, that's all at odds with like what musicians actually do. It's like music is an art to them. They've obviously made it their life. They've made it their career. Now they're like with labels tell them what they should and shouldn't do, and that like directly suppresses like their creative output, which we think is really harmful for those artists. Also, is that like desperate up and coming artists are going to be forced to take up contracts which like in order to give themselves a platform, right? They're going to be locked in. This like looks like them being locked into like really harsh conditions, or at least being inclined to accept these conditions due to being like blinded by the upfront benefits. Again, this is what happens when labels are seen as like the only means through which to get like a platform, to get like onto streaming platforms for your music to be advertised. It's like the power which these labels hold mean that people are going to be like irrationally willing to sign with them just to get their music out there and to get themselves out there. So the impacts of this is that artists can't like truly embrace and appreciate their art. Like we tell you, record labels are at odds with artists who might want to like take time or create certain types of music. Now they literally can't do that because they've got those like exterior motives which labels place on them. Also, they're locked into deals where they're at the mercy of the labels, right? They're liable to abuse. That's like the possibility of all that happening is a lot higher when you're locked into like these like high-powered record labels. Also, there's like, you're literally going to get less individuals in the music industry. Like, music is like the passion of particular artists who might not yet have a platform, but they can't be fully expressed without these record labels. So like, people are going to be left behind, unable to like enter the music industry. So you've literally got less artists, less competition, and that equates like poorer quality of music as a whole. So between points, I will take a POI if you guys have one.
Yeah, how does a small artist that is a racial minority get a foot in the door if there are no longer record labels?
Well, like, irrespective of like whether they're a racial minority or not, I've just told you that like the presence of like record labels means that people are going to be disenfranchised just because they don't sign to particular like contract conditions. That's what happens when you've got like labels in and of themselves holding so much power. Secondly, is the unjust financial distribution to artists. So labels, like, again, we tell you labels are like profit driven. This in itself creates a deficit in how much artists like ought to get paid. Here's 5 mechanisms for why that's the case. Firstly, is that artists are not given not given proper dividends for the income which they generate, right? Like, the hold which record labels have over artists means that they can take unfair amounts. When labels are seen as like the only way out or like the only way into the music industry for an artist, they're going to sign like contract deals in which like the labels are taking like unfair amounts of money, like completely unjust amounts of money from that artist's pay. We remove that on our side of the house by the artist being the sole beneficiary of the income which their music generates. Secondly, is that increasing popularity of their artist doesn't equate to more pay for them. This is because they're locked into a contract, so they're not even paid more if their music increases in popularity. More people are listening, they're generating more income for their label, but aren't getting paid more, even though like they're generating more income as an individual. On our side, what's really beneficial is that these artists are independent. They are the direct beneficiaries, whether they when they become more popular, if their music is of a quality to become more popular, they're going to be the sole beneficiaries of that. We think that's a lot more just than being like locked into this contract, which doesn't change to the same extent. Thirdly, is that like literally the artists have to see out their contract. Like, even if an artist has got like grounds, again, I tell you about like blatant underpaying and like abuse, even if they've got grounds to leave, they lose all their income if they do. You're locked into a contract. Also, is that up and coming artists are left behind financially. So even if their quality of music is better, they will never like get off the ground because they don't have the finances. Or or even if like their label isn't as good, say they are signed and your label isn't as good as another artist, you don't have the same financial means to be able to get your music out there, get heard by others. Fifthly, is that artists if artists leave the label, they cut off financially. This looks like labels like having the means to like slander, tell other labels not to employ them. The impacts of this is the financial dependence on labels and major inequality for those artists who are up and coming. On our side, what we're proud to support is like the quality of music directly equating to the benefits of those artists. That's why we're proud to affirm.
Sweet. All good, judges? Sweet. I thank the speaker for that speech and call on the first negating speaker to begin their team's case.
Starting 3, 2, 1. Record labels are a uniquely beneficial mechanism to allow mobility for talented artists, leading to better music quality and within the industry, which enriches the artistic value of music to the highest accessibility and quality in this debate. Now, that is why this side of the house thinks that we should always support the existence of these record labels. Now, a few things I'm going to do in today's my case. First, I'm going to outline a path to victory and deliver some rebuttal to their case and really frame out what the music industry actually looks like. And before providing two substantives, one on how we get better outcomes for listeners, and two, how we get better outcomes for artists. So firstly, we're going to take issue with like some of the framing that the Thermi team put out. Now, firstly, the Thermi team came out and said that just artists would just use their own capital to promote themselves in the absence of these record labels. Now, firstly, this is actually like the problem here. Artists don't have the capital. They don't have the resources available to themselves to actually promote themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't go to a record label, right? So that's like a problem with the counterfactual. Like, if we were to take away record labels, artists just wouldn't be able to have the ability to promote themselves. Now, firstly, on the point of like loss of artistic creativity, etc. Like, labels can and will often like appeal to minority and niche groups of music so that they can make income. As I'll explain later on in my framing, like we believe that we agree that yes, record labels are in fact profit motivated industries, and so they are doing the best they can to make as much money. So this also leads on to like kind of like the point about how labels will be slandering the artists to make sure they don't go to other labels. Now, this actually just makes no sense whatsoever. Now, if you were to put a bad name on an artist because they didn't sign your contract, the other competing label would actually just sign that person up because they know that they were going to make money from them because they're in direct competition. So what do we think the music industry actually looks like in today's debate? We think that that record labels are multidimensional. Firstly, we think they're the corporate structure, which looks like they are profit incentivized by either their shareholders or their owners. And so that means, what does that mean? Why does that lead to good outcomes? It means that they're profit motivated. And why does it lead to good outcomes? It means that they want to sign more artists. It means they're going to be able to they're going to be looking for the most talented artists, and even in like smaller or more niche locations. Also, it means they're going to have an incentive to do a good job and to produce high quality music for those artists. Now, why is this? Because more quality, a high quality of music and more artists mean that you can cater to a wider variety of listeners, which ultimately leads to profit. So the second dimension we think that these record labels actually have is that they have like the dimension of like the people within the company. We think that if you're in the music industry, because it's such a niche career path, it means you have to forge your way in there yourself, and it means that you're often invested in these artists, invested in the artists that you're going to work. Now, this is non-contingent on the company structure and incentive, and it means that they're often going to be looking for the best outcomes for their artists that they're working with. So what do we think the counterfactual looks like? Well, when you remove record labels from the world, it means industry becomes a lot more muddled. It means you have a lot less clear and high quality music. And it means artists who are actually really talented just can't find a way to produce their music to a high enough quality to promote themselves, as my second speaker will elaborate on, and also to just get out there and make music, enjoy what they do. Like doing. Now, no, we don't stand for just big labels taking advantage of Sony, taking advantage of artists, for example. And we think that this whole point about profit incentivization actually deals with like exploitative contracts, etc. like that. So, on to my first standard. Why do we get better outcomes for listeners and listeners? Now, this is the biggest stakeholder in this debate, because without listeners, we wouldn't actually have an industry. Now, firstly, on our side of the house, we know that we get better quality on our side. Now, why is this? I mean, this is because, of course, as I've explained, labels are incentivized to produce high-quality music, and they also have the resources to do this. Producing music is like really resource-intensive. It requires a lot of sunk costs, like recording studios, editing, producing, and also marketing and promoting, and which means that artists who are small and don't have a record label can't actually do this by themselves really easily. Now, even if that quality is attainable on like the filming side of the house, even if you believe that artists could attain high quality music on their own, the cost is so high that means it's so difficult to afford and to produce music on a high quantity, which is essentially what makes musicians able to afford living on their music. Secondly, we think that we make music more accessible on our side of the house. We think that labels streamline the whole promoting process, etc. And it means that when they're trying to see the artist succeed, they're going to promote the music as much as possible to as many different people as possible to get their music out. Now, what does this look like? This looks like, for example, if a big record label has Taylor Swift on their books, it means they're going to put like a smaller artist out before one of her concerts as like a smaller act just before Taylor Swift comes on, and this is going to give like a lot of exposure to new artists and to wider audiences. So we think that because it becomes more mainstream, etc. So what are the outcomes of this? Now on this side of the house, this means we get like better enjoyment for listeners. Now no one wants to listen to like low quality music, and so when we have high quality production that's only possible on our side of the house, you get more people wanting to listen to this music, you get a wider market, and it's better for the listeners themselves. I'll take a pure right now in between points.
Sweet. So how can artists protect their creativity in the face of profit-driven labels?
Well, this is simple because listeners actually want a diverse range of music. Contrary to what you try to put out on your side of the house, listeners actually want to listen to like some really diverse music. And so profit and record labels know this, and so that's why they're going to sign people who are artistically diverse so that they can cater to those wide markets. Now, on to the second point about how we get better outcomes for artists. Now, we think that we get better outcomes for artists because labels are essentially the stepping stone into the big time. So we think that as again, like under the counterfactual, there's nothing to replace the stepping stone that record labels provide. We think that it is unlikely that artists can reach the big time, become very popular without these record labels. Why do we think this? We think that record labels firstly have like large amounts of experience and connection. They know how to promote an artist. They know how to get them out there and make sure that they're doing well. Secondly, we think they have like the funding and resources to do this really effectively, as I explained before. But also, thirdly, we have brand reputation. Now, this brand reputation means that they can go to things like Spotify, to music things like Spotify, and get better deals for their artists, and so they can get a larger profit share for these artists themselves. Now, we think that like the outcomes for this it means that like, as I've explained, you get more people, a larger quantity of people, of artists on these record labels. It means you get more of them on places like Spotify, etc. More of them get discovered, more of them get more popular in a quicker amount of time, and they often make more money, which is something that the net affirming team cannot claim to have as a benefit today. So that is why you should stand with side negating the move must fall.
Judges, all good? Sweet. Cool, I thank the speaker for that speech and call on the second affirming speaker to continue their team's case.
presence of massive corporate giants cause the inequity within signed versus unsigned individuals. They actively make it harder for minority groups, and they are the entire reason that you supposedly cannot succeed without corporate help. I'm going to start off with my split point over the inequity for minority artists and listeners, then I'm going to move on to some rebuttal. So on to my split point now. So first off, you're going to see immense inequity for minority artists when record labels are in control. Record labels continually push artists to cater towards the general market. They do not fill niches. If their main priority is financial, they want to cater to the greatest group possible, which is what they do. You see a lot of pop radio, you see a lot of that kind of thing, and you don't actually see any unique, stylized people. And if you do, they are not minorities. These record labels are incentivized by money and money only, or at the very least, it takes the main precedent. So 5 reasons as to why minorities cannot succeed when record labels are in control. So the first reason is nepotism. Quite often, these record labels are run by rich white individuals who only hire people who already had connections. They're doing a favor for a family friend. They're doing a favor to someone who was already in the industry and would have had connections regardless. They do this with corporate plans by manipulating audiences and making up the idea that they are somehow better than any minority who is trying to succeed. This makes the minorities feel like they aren't worth the support of a massive corporate giant, and they aren't talented, which they are. Number 2, they cater to the majority. Unique music is simply not promoted. New sounds are sterilized, gentrified, and tokenized if they are included, and small genres like indigenous music are never picked up by labels. Number 3, often the people in charge are often traditionalists with music because they're so old and because they're rich and white. Even if the majority of people would like the music, for example with Bohemian Rhapsody, they don't want to go against the norms that are already in place, so the music is not published. This means that creativity and quality of music is completely determined subjectively and based on old, out-of-date habits which these producers want to support. Number 4, they are quite often racist or sexist or transphobic and homophobic, and they simply will not sign them because of these precedences. They won't, even if they do sign them, they won't allow them to make songs that actually apply to their identity because they want to cater to the market, which may include racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic individuals. So 5, even if they do pick them up, they won't advertise them to the same extent as white people or the majority. They won't prioritize these individuals, for example, by giving them connections to others, by giving them connections with collabs and that kind of thing, by putting them at the front of a Taylor Swift concert. This means that up and coming artists, particularly minorities who aren't picked up, don't get any chance. There is poor representation in the music industry, meaning they cannot succeed. Minority messages don't get out as much, so the music industry is not prepared for them. Minority listeners cannot relate to their music, and they're never exposed to new cultures, and you get boring, repetitive music winning over unique, quality music in the end. For example, a black trans woman could not succeed to the same level that an unstigmatized person would be. So when was the last time you saw a black trans woman within a music song? So when an industry is controlling and musicians are puppeted by massive corporate plants and individuals who don't meet their subjective standards, they cannot succeed. So first off, I'm going to look at the point on what first Ned said over the fact that you can't succeed without help from corporate record labels. So this would be true under the status quo. However, it's not going to be true on our side of the house. This happens because corporate record labels dominate the industry. This happens when they control sound studios, when they control advertising, when they have all of the connections to all of the people that you need to get into contact with to succeed. This wouldn't happen if those connections weren't only able to be found through these corporations. So we would say the majority of the time, these musicians are succeeding in the first place from their own independent actions, for example, from viral videos. They die out as soon as corporations get involved. Number 2, this also exists because of the perception that being picked up somehow means that you are a talented individual. Those who aren't picked up are seen as unworthy for no good reason. If a record label were not a thing, this perception would not exist. Number 3, they can form connections more naturally. They actually have more available because those who are connected to record labels can only collab with others who are signed to the same record label. This means that stuff like Taylor Swift supporting another artist isn't able to happen to the same extent because you don't have as many options available. So on the point of labels streamlining promotion, we would say that small artists wouldn't be promoted by the others. It's largely not true, right? Just they mainly rely on very large artists, making them thousands and millions of dollars because they're able to manipulate them and because those contracts force them into it in the first place. Additionally, collabs become less accessible because they're limited by the ties to record labels. Someone from Sony can't collab with someone from another record label, so that wouldn't happen on the same extent. So we'd actually see more small artists being promoted by others because in reality these incentives are there regardless, right? These large artists want to uplift the rest of the music community. They want to help small artists and they want the music industry to be more passionate, more emotive, and more making more beautiful music and encouraging unique sounds. They encourage creativity and they're going to do that on their own without a corporate record label interfering. On the point of not having an industry, first off, we would just say that's untrue, right? We gave you pretty clear mechanisms as to how someone can succeed without having a record label in the first place. This largely happens regardless. People are succeeding on platforms such as Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube Music. These are all available, and the idea of a record label is incredibly outdated to that exact point because everyone has all of these advertising capabilities regardless, right? And additionally, we would have more sound studios because they're able to make that and they don't rely on connections to having a connection to a record label to succeed. Also, on the idea that you're going to earn more in the long term, this cannot be true under any instance because these record labels innately have to take a profit, right? They're going to take a chunk out. Even if they have the nicest incentives and are wanting to promote good musicians, they will take a chunk of your pay out. Additionally, marketing and promoting can happen on your own, so we don't think this has to be symmetric. On characterization, you said they didn't have any capital. First off, this is simply not true, right? They already have a fan base, they've likely blown up and been spotted by the record industry as someone to manipulate. Additionally, they look for niche markets and talents. The issue with this is that the market is majoritarian. Talented is also being determined by a bunch of rich white individuals rather than the audience themselves, which would happen under our side of the house. Radio and pop thrives while indigenous sounds are held down. So I'm going to look at what Nick said and why it still stands. On the manipulation point, the first Nick was not responded to. They are locked in by contracts. Number 2, they weren't having accountability. Number 3, they're still forcing artists to pump out music. Number 4, they are majoritarian. They dictate what music spreads, as I've already proved. Labels aren't going to cater to the niches markets. Number 5, desperate and up-and-coming artists are still locked in. On his point on finances, dividends are still not a fair representative. Increased popularity still doesn't change. It changes in contract. And number 3, they still have contract breaches, getting them not being paid. Up-and-coming artists is still not being picked. And artists leaving and spreading slander would still happen because because they're already proved that they can't be worked with. So companies are going to go for them because they can't be manipulated. This is why we are proud to affirm.
Sweet. Judges?
Yeah, I'm just going to say something real quick. I'm actually chill with, maybe this is controversial, but I'm chill with when your team's speaking, for example, Northland, when your speaker's speaking, you don't need to have your mic on as well at the bench, because otherwise I could hear you talking at the bench over the top sometimes of your speaker.
So that camera that their visual is showing isn't actually on. It's just the mic is quite sensitive, so we just want kids to be a little quieter. It's just the same mic.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's just I know it came over the top of.
Yeah, sorry.
I was
nobody quiet.
Sweet. Cool. I thank the speaker for that speech and call on the second negating speaker to continue their team's case.
I'll take your eyes for the wave. Don't freak out, I'll come around and ask you if I've forgotten. Our faces an uphill battle today because even if they're able to prove that the music industry is quite abusive, right? if artists wouldn't have exceeded at all, would have gone up and ended in some like minimum wage job, wouldn't have made it at all in the music industry, right? That doesn't actually matter. Their case falls apart. 3 things I'm going to be dealing with in this speech. Firstly, listeners, why they're the most important in this space. Secondly, artists, which has been like the main area of clash that most people have talked about in this space. Thirdly, split on small artists. What's the clash today? The clash today is artists, just because, you know, it's been the thing that's been like most like debated about between the 2 teams. It's been our most crossover. Note, however, I think it's important to note that listeners are still the most important stakeholder today for all the reasons we framed out at first. But like, you know, because they're the biggest stakeholder, because they're listening every day, because their joy, their ability to escape, to have escapism, their ability to like derive meaning and culture from music, those things are all very important to them. So those things like quality, those things like accessibility, so important to them in this industry. No, we have no engagement from their bench on our material on this. They're going to need to engage on this because it's our most important point in the debate. Can't just be left unresponded to. Now into our clash on our material on which side gets the best outcomes for artists. What's the next thrust on our bench today? We tell you, firstly, artists are literally just unable to succeed without these record labels. We tell you that's things because of things like the experience of these companies, like the ability to fund their initiatives, like their ability to utilize brand rep, to use like actually leverage the artists, right? What's their response here? So firstly, they say artists are going to support them through support themselves through employing their own teams, right? Firstly, artists don't have this funding to do this. Emmanuel explained this at first. We really clearly framed this out of why cost and time as a sunk harm to get any fame in the industry was massive, and you were going to be like almost at the point of breaking, almost at the point of bankruptcy, and you needed them to come in and bail you out to get any legitimacy, any success in the industry, right? Because of this, they need to prove why you're able to afford this. We think probably the only way you're able to afford this is through like family wealth, right? And all you do then is just make the music industry very class divided. It's something that only the wealthy can afford to go into, right? We think that's probably even more harmful than the current status quo, right? Okay, also, they wanted to tell us that controlling artists by record labels was going to be a massive problem. This was a key thrust of their case material. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, like they can just shift to a different record label in the same way that a shopper might shift from like Pack and Save to Countdown, right? Look, we think that like if Taylor Swift is like being abused at her company and only like earning 20% of the revenue, she'll just shift to a different company who might offer her 30% of the revenue, right? Because that, although that's like a decrease in what the other company was getting, they're still getting 70%. That's a lot of revenue. They're very incentivized to do that, right? What is their response to this? They say, but we've got contracts, right, that lock them in, right? Look, we think the main mechanism for earning money off of things is royalties, right? Because that's the least risk, most risk-free investment for these companies. It's generally how it's done in the music industry, right? Because of that, like Taylor Swift, even though she's moved on from her original record label and now she's producing music by herself, right? She's still earning royalties. She's still earning benefits from her like previous record label. Literally, for this point, the free market economy fixes it. You're able to shift around between different record labels. Also like to flag that not every record label is like a huge giant, although there are some huge giants in the industries. Like Wellington has record labels, Christchurch has record labels, Auckland has a couple of record labels, right? So you can go to some of these smaller record labels who are more able to cater to your needs. Also, they wanted to tell us there was just going to be this open abuse, right? A couple of responses there. Firstly, they've got a public brand which could be massively damaged if you do this. That's probably pretty detrimental, something they don't want to do. Also, we'll get artists pushed away from them because you're not interested to go on with a company who's like abusing people, right? They want to tell us also that like people are just going to be sexually assaulted inside these big, powerful brands, right? Two responses to this. Firstly, we tell you the justice system holds it accountable. You just can't go around sexually assaulting people and get away with it. That's not how it works, right? Also, secondly, if these companies are openly abusing them, often when you get the wealth generated from being part of these companies, from your record labels, right, the celebrities often then later go after the companies in legal battles, often able to win back, and like massively damage their brands. They're disincentivized from doing that. Also, they wanted to tell us that minorities and small artists were going to be massively harmed, right? Look, because like they were only going to provide to the majority, right? A couple of things to say here. Firstly, I think it's key to note that there's only so much content the majority of music listeners can consume. So although like I can't listen to music every single hour of the day, right? I can only listen to so much. There's only so much you can sell to the majority, right? So you still have to sell to the majority. You still have to sell to the minorities, right? Because there's still a stakeholder, there's still a market that can be capitalized on because you can't always be selling like millions and millions of hours to like, the majority, right? Even if we think we can deal with like record labels who are often much smaller, often more able to deal with these niche artists. We see like in like places around the world, different like companies that particularly deal with niche groups of music. They may be smaller record labels, but you're still able to access them, right? Look, we don't need this to be the case in every single case, but if you believe there are some record labels out there who are willing to deal with niche music because they don't want to compete with the big majority brands, right? Because of that, we're able to like achieve that. Also, they also need to just prove to us why minorities on your side get any ability to access the music industry, right? If I'm a rapper coming out of like the back blocks of Detroit, or I'm like a small moldy artist out of a low income family, right? I probably have no funds to fund myself into the music industry, so minorities probably don't get in on your side either. That's probably systemically worse on your side of the house. Finally, they want to tell us that they destroy musicians' passion and creativity, get massive burnout. Two responses here. Firstly, brand incentives are like completely against burnout. You lose the investment and like the sunk like investment into the marketing and branding of that individual if they burn out and quit the industry, massively detrimental to these profit incentives they told us they had. Secondly, like if they're producing, even if they stay and they're producing dry and uncreative music, that's no longer profitable because it becomes unengaging. I'll take a PI now if they've got one.
With these record labels who have greater funds, more lawyers, and all of that, not win in court should a sexual assault case come up?
Okay, look, a couple of responses there have just mechanized out why, like, look, you can like report this to the justice system. Justice system often will go after big clients with lots and lots of funding. You're often these artists get really, really wealthy off this. So like Taylor Swift going after a record label is probably pretty good. Even if they don't win in court, even if they're not able to get those settlements, what's our response there? Literally just coming out and saying that they've done that, just huge brand damage to them. Even that is detrimental, even if you're not even able to win on the corporate front, you're probably still able to win on that front. Quickly, why do we get the best outcomes for small artists as my substantive contribution to this debate? Look, firstly, small artists are provided greater opportunities on our side of the house. When we've got coordination with record labels, we're able to get them hired as backing bands, we're able to get them hired as opening bands. That's something we're able to achieve on our side because we've got more artists flourishing. Secondly, we get more platforming opportunities, right? They wanted to tell us that Spotify and YouTube and SoundCloud were their solutions to this. What's our response to that? Just quickly, because it engages with this mechanism here. Look, your team needed the record label to like actually create any legitimacy of that, to actually create like the resources and the capital sunk into it to create good music, right? To create the quality we told you at a manual, right? So otherwise you were just going to get some like really bad phone recording, or at best like a $50 microphone off Amazon that was probably pretty bad. You probably weren't able to create that greater quality of music. So Spotify wasn't going to be that great an option for you. Thirdly, you're going to create more small artists because of the opportunity that you're going to succeed, because of the opportunity to get into a record label. More people are going into the small art. This is like probably like reasonably likely on our side of the house. We tell you it's also important because it deals with specific good. So overall, what are we able to do? We're able to tell you the best outcomes for the listeners, which is the most important group in the debate. No, they still haven't engaged in this. Hope they'll do it in their next speech. Secondly, we're able to prove we get the best outcomes for artists. Overall, we win on our side of the house.
Sweet. Are we all good to continue? Perfect. Cool. I thank the speaker for that speech and call on the third affirming speaker to conclude the substantive portion of the affirming team's case.
Can you guys hear me? I think we've all heard of Taylor Swift in this debate. A person who was signed with a record label, who was exploited, who was sexually assaulted, had no means of getting her songs back. Her songs were sold without her permission. That is so harmful because opposition likes to claim that these artists are the biggest actors in this debate. They are the biggest actors. We protect them under our side of the house. three main points of contention in today's debate. Firstly, which side gets the better outcome for these artists? Secondly, around the model and how this will be implemented. And thirdly, on the better outcome of the listeners. Just a quick note, the listeners aren't the biggest actor in this debate. The biggest actor are the artists. These are the people who are producing the music. These are people who will be exploited. Cool. Now I've got that out of the way. For opposition to win today's debate, they have to prove two things. Firstly, that they increase the outcomes for these artists. And secondly, that music will be more diverse under their side and record labels will produce niche musics. Cool. I'm going to move on to the first point of clash about better outcomes for artists. Because this is where opposition spent 8 minutes of analysis, and I'm still unsure how they actually benefit these artists. So what we've heard from opposition is that when you sign with a record label, you get better resources, you get connections, you get brand deals, and they also push this claim that you can leave these record labels, you can just ditch them. Cool. For response to this, first is just yes, that's true. You get better resources, but at the same time, you're abused. You don't get the profit. You get a small margin of that profit. You have no control of your music. You can you're forced to produce music that they want, right? You're forced, if the producer doesn't like your songs, you can no longer produce that music. If the producer doesn't like it, they're just get out of it. I'm not going to do any of your songs. If all of a sudden you want to change, you want to leave the record label, you can't do that. The harms of this is that people become burnout, right? They're forced to do everything the producer wants. A white man in an ivory tower, he does not have the most diverse range of music. Secondly, this means that there's going to be a whole bunch of bland music and artists who don't want to produce anymore. They can't produce their creative reasons. Their creativity is what got them in the industry because they knew the chances of success were very low. They got into it because they wanted to show their passion. They want to show their creativity. They can no longer do this when they're in a record label because these record label artists are just thinking, how do I get the most profit? To get the most profit, you have to go for the most people who listen to radio between 8 and 9 in the morning. That is mostly middle-class white people who live in the middle of city. So yes, you may get a bit more profit, a bit more resources. We support creativity. We support not being abused and actually getting the profit from your product. Secondly, this still means to get this under our side of the house, you get through the industry and you get profit through managers. You talk to your manager, you're how can I do this? You post a video on TikTok and you no longer live in the 19th century where you have to have a record label post you in front of Taylor Swift's stage. You literally hop on TikTok with an iPhone 6 and you say, I'm singing, look at me. If you're good, people will watch. That's how you get through the industry. You don't need a 50-year-old man giving you $5 and a pat on the back. That is so untrue. My third response is that just it happens because corporations are a monopoly. They have a whole bunch of money. They're I'm going to support you. If you don't fit in who they support, if they've got too many people doing pop music, they're not going to get you. They're not going to care about you. You can't go to anyone else because you've got no more connections. Fourthly, they simply can't because they put this big case that you can just leave the record label if they're sexual assaulters. I just want to quickly point you at Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift couldn't even leave. She's a completely successful woman. She could not get her music back. She was sexually assaulted. She could not leave the record label. This is because of contracts. When you're on a contract, you cannot literally drop your contract. It's illegal. And secondly, if you leave your contract after it's finished, the record label is going to be they're a really shit person to work with. They're really bad. If a record label picks them up, they're going to get bad stigma, which means nobody's going to pick them up because they got such bad stigma. They're really hard to work with. We've also heard this push that labels assign a variety of people, a variety of music. They get a whole bunch of really cool stuff. My first response here is just they follow the majority. As I said before, this is a white man deciding what music goes on. The white man doesn't have a diverse range of music. If he hears Indigenous Australian music for the first time, he's not going to like it. He doesn't know what people like, so he's going to go for the money. He thinks the biggest thing I can get is a whole bunch of Taylor Swift songs. He's going to get people singing Taylor Swift songs, no creativity, all just plastic Barbie doll songs. My second response is under our side of the house, we still have all of these good musics. We still have Taylor Swift, but equally, if the music's really good, if these artists are good and they're not signed on a record label, they still have the ability to get on this platform because they can post it. They can post on Spotify, and if people like it, they will follow. They'll get a platform. The opposition's failed to acknowledge this. They've also pushed a big claim just before that minorities have no means of getting into the music industry under our side of the house. Our first response here is when there's no record labels, if they're good, they will get in the underside of the house. They can post on TikTok, as I said. Secondly, artists and record labels have better means of discriminating against them. If they don't like who this is, if they don't like the minority, they just don't sign them. There's no means. They can't actually get onto the board. So if they don't have a record label, they can't even get in. My third response is under our side of the house, we get more popular and talented artists. They're paid more. If you're good, you get paid more. If you're a minority, people don't really discriminate. It's only the white people who live in the ivory towers who discriminate. They think, look, when have you ever seen a black trans woman in a record label? You never have, because all they want is Taylor Swift, Barbie dolls, because that's what they think looks like on a good image. In reality, it doesn't. I'll take a quick POI if opposition's got one.
Yeah. Why would a record label ignore market conditions to promote music that only rich white people like, given that the market is not comprised of only rich white people?
Well, the thing is, that's the majority in this society, right? The majority of people who will be listening to radio at 8 o'clock are white middle-class people. How can I get the amount of white middle-class people? It's like producing Red Hot Chili Peppers. You cannot claim that there's a whole bunch of people on the news at 8 o'clock in the morning wanting to listen to the didgeridoo. That's not happening. And our side of the house, whoever wants to play the didgeridoo can play it, and if they're good, they can get popular. Cool. Now for this quick point of contention about the model, because oppositions claim that artists don't have means to like advertise when they buy their individual, they need record labels. Three responses here. Firstly is like under status quo, people who don't have a record label can't succeed. When you're like competing against someone with a record label and someone without a record label, the person with the record label would like really succeed, right? They can get all the connections, all the resources, they equally get sexually assaulted. But if you don't have a record label, you have no means of doing that because you're competing against someone like a massive minority. Under our side of the house, these people are equal. It's now done by ability, not by looks. It's now done by how good you can play music, how good you can sing, not how good you look on the camera. My second response here is that there's just more discrimination on the opposition side of the house because because they're at hand of the record label. As soon as they sign on to the record label, they have to do everything the record label says, otherwise they're going to get kicked out. Third response here is like, as Giovanni said, there's things like SoundCloud, more studios keeping, like the increased ability for people to produce music, create music at home. That is what is really cool. That's what we get on our side of the house. A whole bunch of people in equal status, a whole bunch of equal people, no longer minorities, disadvantaged. Instead, if you're good at singer, you get good popularity. That's what we stand for on our side of the house. Cool. Now for this last point of clash about listeners, because opposition has tried to claim that they win literally on listeners. This is not the biggest actor in today's debate. The biggest actor is these artists. Cool. So what have we heard from opposition? We've heard that labels are incentivized to produce good music, get best people involved, sign upcoming artists. Two main responses here. Firstly, yes, their like incentive is profit driven. This looks like pleasing the majority. E.g., lots of white people who sing Red Hot Chili Peppers on a Friday night, right? This means producing a whole bunch of Red Hot Chili Peppers. This looks like producing Taylor Swift. So as soon as someone knew, and like for example, Bohemian Rhapsody, right? It was new, it's never been done before. Nobody signed it because they thought it'd be a really horrible failure. That happened in reality. So they produced it by themselves. They got a whole bunch of popularity. We get that under our side of the house. Good songs being produced, and not having to like follow a record label equality. My second response here is that you don't get niche music because of producers like traditionalists, right? A whole bunch of these music producers are like, oh, I don't like the sound of that music. It's very subjective. They're like, oh, I don't know if that would like. How can a 50-year-old man judge what society wants? They literally can't, right? They just go by their instincts. Do I like the sound of this? No. They don't think about the market necessarily. They think about how the market would react in their side of the house. So that means a whole bunch of minorities aren't able to do this. So on our side of the house, people can produce music they like because they're passionate. At the end of today's debate, opposition cannot win because they do not improve the outcomes of these artists themselves. They further disenfranchise them, make sure they're abused, take all their money and rights away from their music. And secondly, the music will be less diverse because it's a whole bunch of white people sitting on an ivory tower deciding what to produce. They're not thinking about different groups in the middle of Australia. That is what we do. If you're a better singer, you get better platform. So proud to affirm in today's moment.
Cool. Are we all good to keep going? Cool. I thank the speaker for that speech and call on the third negating speaker to continue the team's case.
Yeah.
Just pairwise, just like visually, just wave. Joe is false to tell us at the end of the speech that artists that are good would get the platform better on their side of the house. Because the reality was of our case that at the point at which you were a talented artist, they went viral, a platform like TikTok or like Spotify, you were more likely to get a record label when people recognize your talent. That is when you actually able to like increase your capital through all these structural reasons we gave you as to why it was likely better for you as an artist, we win on those grounds. I'll chat about 3 things. Firstly, I'll talk about artists. Secondly, talk about listers. Finally, on like minority groups and minority artists. But first, one brief clarification. Because I think a lot of the crux of the affirming team's case here is this assertion that artists are just locked into record label deals and they just cannot escape them. 4 reasons why that's not true. Firstly, we tell you can leave the record label when another record label is able to offer you a higher deal. Know why that's incredibly probable, right? Because at the point at which you've now built up like a bit of a cult of following and you have supporters and fans, you're likely to like increase your market like impetus to consume your music, which means you're more likely to get that. Secondly, it looks really bad on the record label's reputation when artists leaves because things like conspiracy theories and cancelling on social media will likely eventuate. Thirdly, we tell you there's a general awareness of the harms of contracts that exist. Like the vast majority of artists are able to rationalize those and they know if they're going to be like locked into contracts for like 30 years, it's unlikely to happen. But fourthly, you still make money from the old record deal at the point at which you take on a new one. See the example of Taylor Swift. Cool. Now let's deal with the harms to artists. They tell us that artists are locked in and can't escape. Just start with that, my clarification. Then they tell us there's a huge lack of accountability within these record labels and things like sexual assaults happen. Firstly, we tell you there is a huge scrutiny on companies because they have a massive following because they are in the public sphere, in the public eye. Obviously, we thought that was completely improbable. Secondly, let's break down that idea of accountability because obviously artists with huge following are likely to be a stronger voice that can speak out at the point at which these instances do happen, that are likely to be more acted on and have greater backlash on the company than the artist when they do that because they have the culture following built up. No, thank you. But finally, we gave you incentive structures at the beginning that wasn't really dealt with, which means like the middle management is likely to have like whistleblowers people who are just there because they care about music, right? The next time they tell us is that artists are going to pump music en masse and they lead to burnout because of the record labels. Firstly, I think that you allow burnout when artists can never actually get a foot in the door in the first place, which means that they massively inhibit artistic freedom to a far worse extent on their side of the house. But secondly, we tell you we just reject that entirely because often it's better when record labels and artists have the impetus to hype up albums and actually prolong the publishing of those albums. We reject that claim. Finally, they tell us you harm their creative niches. I think Elliot pushes back here really well when he tells you can only sell so much to the majority. The record labels aim to fulfill minority niches once they've captured that majority of those artists. So even if you do it's incredibly short term. See the example of Juice WRLD, they had, they've got some funky music with some not so nice messages, right? But then he did that wholesome collab about school graduations or something. But we also tell you here, probably harm it far worse on their side of the house when their platforms aren't created, the artists aren't able to actually explore their creative niches and get them consumed at any time because they feel like it's not working, they've got to change something, right? Okay, finally, on profit dividends and increasing popularity doesn't equate to greater pay. Obviously, there was the harm of pay to the point where they didn't have a label in the first place. So that bar was incredibly low to pass on the comparative. Secondly, we tell you the vast majority of contracts and cases have the proportion of the profits you earn from your record label of the revenue, but we think I think I already dealt with this when I told you that they do have mechanisms at the point at which they are underpaid in my clarifications. The final claim they trot out here is that you impact the reputation of artists at the point they leave. We think the inverse happens, that when the artist who has the cult of following at the point when they leave has the capacity to impact the reputation of the company, that means they're likely to treat them with very nice pay, working conditions, no sexual assault, etc. What was our material on musicians here? We told you that you lose out on the struggling upcoming artists because record labels were uniquely able to capitalize on the talented individuals that go viral. No, thank you. That was because, firstly, music was very expensive and you run dry of energy and funds. You lack capital. Secondly, they were inexperienced. And finally, the brands had huge reputation. They said that it would be successful on their side of the house, on their comparative, because the record labels harm the market. You can have a platform through Spotify on their side of the house. The first thing to say here is that obviously Joe's example of you singing into an iPhone 6 is never ever going to get you like a platform and like people following you, because that sounds really bad. There's like the crackles and stuff. I'm sorry, I have an iPhone 7 and it's really bad for recording, so I know this is like the story of my life. Secondly, let's actually engage with the scope of what they're saying here. When you're a record label, you get charged like a huge portion of your profits, especially if you're very talented. I think on Spotify, like if you get a listen, that's like 1/1000th or like 1/10,000th of a cent every time you get a listen. Obviously the magnitude of the pay we're talking was completely inequitable and completely disparate, even if you were kind of bad. Also, we gave you analysis about how they could turn to other small labels. At Elliot, he told you how there are other small labels that existed, and he also gave you a really important split point about how there are still opportunities for small artists on our side of the house. So we think if their path to victory was artists in the debate, they don't achieve that. Let's talk about where this debate really happened, which was listeners. We told you that you get better quality and accessibility. We told you on quality that record labels had a unique incentive to profit over the higher costs, and they could like streamline music through production through economies of scale. They tell us agents can also do this, but obviously they didn't engage with the fact that they had less capital and less negotiation power. We win on quality there. Then on accessibility, we told you there was an incentive to promote music as much as possible, and it was likely to be far more easy to access. They say you can't have collabs between, actually I'll take a POI briefly now.
Why would Taylor Swift not speak out or leave earlier if she would have been a stronger voice than the record label?
Okay, because Taylor Swift probably doesn't even exist as a huge platform on your side of the house, because she never had the record label to begin with, because she never was able to come up to the kind of high cult and status that she has today. If your harm is sexual assault, I think that is improbable, given that when you have a record label, you likely have a huge following, a huge fan base, which is going to cancel any company that sexually assaults you. They say you can't have collabs between record labels. That's perhaps true, but was never the point. When different followers exist from different labels and artists, that is where you get a more diverse range and variation of musicians who win on accessibility. This listeners' clash was crucial, and I think it went woefully under-engaged with by this Northland team. That was because enjoyment stems from good music, right? You get greater choice within that music market, which means you create a critical sense of escapism within that. That looked like really critical shaping your identity, giving teenage girls an out to cry over Taylor Swift songs. When you're abused in your home situation, you can relate to music and know that pay is temporary. You get a huge emotional benefit. Note that this was the widest stakeholder in the debate, right? Artists were only a small proportion compared to the entire population that can enjoy that music. Finally, on minority artists, we tell you it's not exclusive. Discrimination was always worse on their side of the house when these people were in society. They couldn't be tokenized by these companies. Proud to oppose.
Cool, are we ready to move forward? Sweet, I thank the speaker for that speech. We will now move into the leader's replies, and as is customary, we will reverse the speaking order, so I call on the leader of the negating team to conclude their team's case.
Look, I might be an all-right debater, but that doesn't matter at all. It doesn't mean anything if coaches like Adam, Peter, and Amy don't come forward and take me to nationals. That means I can't leverage my brand to anything. None of you viewers out there watching the live stream can enjoy this. Why then is Nick's case so problematic? It's so problematic today because brand labels are the stepping stone upon which you need to avoid bankruptcy and ending up working in a minimum wage job and playing some music on weekends and actually be making it a career path, right? Nick removed this stepping stone, and therefore it doesn't actually matter if they're harmful to these record labels because they never actually reached that. We explained that so clearly at first, why that was so important because of things like funding, because of things like leveraging their brand legitimacy, other things like that. Because of that, two clash in debate. Firstly, artist outcomes. Secondly, listener outcomes. Firstly, what's artist outcomes? What's ops thrust today? But we tell you, the only way you're going to succeed as an artist is with these brand experience. That's because of factors like the experience of these record labels, like the funds they provide, like the brand reputation they provide, and actors like, but the man in this big white ivory tower, he's so prejudiced, he's only going to get you to produce old white people music. Look, literally pick up your phone right now, go down to a store that's playing music right now, listen to things like jazz, listen to things like Taylor Swift, listen to things like jazz pop, right? That is not old white people music, right? The stuff that the majority of listeners out there are listening to today, the major popular artists are not the kind of things that my granddad's listening to at home right now. That was because they had market analysts to look and provide what was going to be able to cater to audience best, what was going to be most profitable, right? This also flagged our point on how we were going to have to cater minorities, because there's only so much you can sell, only so much money you can make off selling to the majority. So eventually some companies were going to see, it would now be more profitable to go after these minorities rather than compete with the big brand companies. And then actors like, but you can't have the record labels, you can't leave the record labels because of these permanent contracts, and that's so detrimental. Look, this is literally probably just not true, right? Why is that? Because in every other industry, you can't be just forced to stay at a record label. You can't be forced to be kept there. That probably breaks like a ton of labor laws. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure forcing someone to stay at your company is pretty problematic, breaks a ton of laws. And then they're like, but this is going to open up to so much abuse in these companies because they're so powerful. 3 lines of analysis we gave you to this. Firstly, they have public brands that's going to be a huge detriment, not only to their profit, but also to their ability to attract artists in the future. Secondly, we tell you, they're going to have, like, the free market economy fixes this. You can just go to another record label, even if it's slightly smaller, even if it's not one of the big corporates, right? You can still go to them. They'll still be interested in having your business. Thirdly, they'll just be cancelled, out by their cult following, and they won't be able to make any profit of any other people coming through into the industry because all their other artists are detrimentally impacted. That further impacts, they wanted to tell us that it was profit incentive and that was their key incentive. Because of that, we're able to claim that, right? No, that's probably not the most important point in this debate. What we're able to do is we're able to prove that our thrust stands, prove that their thrust was probably based on the fact that you locked them in these contracts, and that wasn't true. Second clash, what's our thrust in this today? Our thrust in this today, it's actually our key thrust, is that we get the best outcomes for listeners. It's because we get better quality, because you're not recording on an iPhone 6, you're recording in the studio. That's true, because that's why people enjoy listening to Taylor Swift and not re-recording a song that I'm singing on my iPhone, right? It talks about things like accessibility, right? By able to cater to larger audiences. This is the most important in this debate, because not only because of their stakeholder size, but also because it's really, really important and impactful to them. People are listening to music every single day, all around the globe, for things like actually having joy, making them happy, actually bringing emotions that are important, engaging in their culture, right? Because of things like allowing them to be escapists in their approach, right? What do we hear from them? We hear literally no engagement down their bench. It's literally, we tell you at first, our debate-winning material, we hear nothing until third when we hear one line, and it's not the most important material in the debate. Panel, we tell you that's probably not enough engagement to take out that point, which we gave you so much analysis on at first. Thank you, guys.
Sweet. Cool. I thank the speaker for that speech and call on the leader of the affirming team to make the final speech of this debate.
The negating team has continued focusing all of their analysis on the benefits that record labels provide for those who are signed to them, even though we've shown you down the line that the power record labels hold results in artists being manipulated, and which is so crucially, those who haven't signed are hugely disadvantaged. Panel, consider how much analysis we've heard from Neg about how good record labels are when we started from first by showing you what happens to those people who don't make up a part of those record labels. if record labels are so damn good, like we've heard over and over again from Nick, then what happens to those people who aren't signed to them? We tell you that they're competing with these huge labels, they're completely left behind, that like their music is not going to be heard at all. Like the affirmative team makes listeners their highest stakeholder, while they're only going to hear the people that are picked up by these record labels who think they can make the most money from them. You have to keep this comparative in mind. All right, firstly, on the benefit to listeners. We'll focus on this, seeing as the affirmative team calls this the highest, the negative team calls these the highest stakeholders in this debate. So we've heard that record labels give a platform to more niche artists, as this is who the population wants to listen to. This was in contention to our point about appealing to the minority. But on our side, the artists who people want to listen to will be the ones who gain the most popularity. What's different on our side is that we give everyone a chance to start on the same playing field. If people want to listen to niche artists, okay, they can. The niche artists will then get more popularity, will then get more means, which are only reserved to the record labels on their side of the house. This is the comparative which is so key, talking about the platform from which people start. It's even on our side, which means that the most popular, we heard about how how the market will correct what's going to be demanded. The same thing goes on our side, except the artists are the sole beneficiaries of the popularity which they generate from themselves. So we win this point by showing that listeners will still choose the artists they want to listen to, irrespective of the influence which labels have. Secondly then, on a platform given to smaller artists, we've heard from the affirmative team, the negating team, that record labels give a means to smaller artists, right? For example, providing providing recording equipment, streamlining streamlining the progress to reach streaming platforms. Again, panel, I want you to consider how many minutes of analysis we've heard just about these good things which labels provide, right? We tell you that small artists, not chosen by record labels, are left competing with those who have. That is the realistic world on their side. On our side, it is the smaller artists who create, it is the smaller artists who create the highest quality music that people actually want to listen to, who gain the popularity and the means, and therefore the means of developing their music, right? The difference is that they all start on the same playing field. Thirdly then, on the benefits and harms to artists who are signed. Note that this is the only group which the negating team has grappled with at all in trying to support all the benefits which labels provide, right? They tell us you still, and a few things we've heard is you still get a huge part of your pay, 70% was the ballpark figure we heard, and that record labels pick up artists and bring them into the spotlight. We literally gave you 5 mechanisms as to why the power held by record labels results in artists being financially worsened, both when they're making up part of the labels and when they're trying to leave them. That's what's so crucial, because on their side you've got a big entity holding all the power that naturally is going to disenfranchise those people who have to be reliant on them if it's their only way out to get all those means which we've heard from the negating team. Also, we tell you that record labels won't reward music irrespective of whether the music is niche or not. It's just going to it's all in direct harm to the creativity of artists, because they're just pumping out what people want to hear. None of this was responded to in terms of the harms that this causes to the creative expression of artists. Bear in mind, this is the entire part, this is their entire career. This is why we're so proud to affirm.
Cool. I thank the speaker for that speech, and that wraps up the debate.
Now, actually, thank you so much for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
It was so much fun.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. The panel are just going to jump into the negative prep room, and we'll be back shortly.
Hey guys. Oh no.
Still can talk.
Hi.
You guys want to have a chat?
Recording in progress. Recording stopped.